Good morning, everybody, or afternoon if you're further out to the east of me. Welcome to today's Assessment, Evaluation, and Research Community of Practice Roundtable. This is the last one for the semester. I noticed some of the names from some of these other ones, so thank you all for joining us. And today, first of all, I'm going to center where I am. So I'm in Calgary, which is in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. It's in the Niitsitapi territory, and the area includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, as well as the Tsuut'ina and the Eehe Nakota. Today, what we're going to be doing is we'll do some brief introductions. Then we've got, I think it's 3 or 4 panel questions, and then we've got some questions for everybody to answer. And as with the previous ones of these, this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube. We're not actually listing them in the public one, I don't believe. So the only way to get access to it is through the link, but we are putting the links up on the Research, Assessment, and Evaluation Community of Practice page so that people can access them over time. So for the introductions, today the team is myself, of course, Noah Arney. I'm the co-chair of RAE. I'm with Thompson Rivers University. We also have Atifa Kareem, who is lead coordinator of career education at University of Toronto. And we have Cindy James, who's the principal coordinator of the Assessment Center, also at Thompson Rivers University. And now they're each going to have a bit of time to introduce themselves. So if you could both introduce yourself, your title, your institution, and what your research interests are.
Sorry, took a little while to get that unmute perfectly there. Hi folks, my name is Atifa Kareem. I use she, her as pronouns, and as we join in conversation today, I just want to acknowledge I'm on the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and locally here in the part of Toronto that I'm on is really rooted in the Williams Treaty and all of the histories that that carries with it. As the lead coordinator for career education at the University of Toronto, I support our central career services team in using an integrated approach to curricular design and assessment across our 4 teams within the central unit. And most currently, what my research interest or area of curiosity is around how do curriculum frameworks in particular and departmental curriculum frameworks shift organizational cultures and shift professional identity as educators for practitioners. Cindy?
Hello, everybody. Cindy James, coordinator of the Assessment Center at TRU and chair of a department. And I'd like to acknowledge that the TRU is located on the Tk'emlúps-Secwépemc territory. Sorry, I'm still having difficulty with that. I'm going to practice more. I have about, I hate to say this, over 30 years. Sort of was, I think I'm going to stop there. 20 within the assessment field. So my research interests are around assessment and evaluation, obviously, in higher education. Also got into the field of emotional intelligence of university students, and the whole student experience in higher ed is something that I'm interested in and have conducted research on.
Thank you both. So we're going to start out now with the panel questions. So the first question, and I'm going to direct this first to Cindy and then to Atifa, is how do you see research differing from assessment and evaluation?
This one is a great question. And I think it all depends how you define research. So for me, I see research as seeking answers to any kind of question with the purpose of increasing knowledge or improving your practices. And with that in mind, I honestly think that's what assessment and evaluation is all about. So I would say it's a field of research. And where assessment is all about exploring the experiences of students and others in higher ed, and evaluation is looking at the efficacy of programs and that. So to me, assessment and evaluation are research. So.
Thank you. Atifa.
Yeah, I can't say that I disagree. I think that there's certainly, in my view, an interlinked relationship between them. I'm also curious about what it looks like for us to problematize what counts as research a little bit, which I think is the space that Cindy and I are offering these definitions or understandings from as well. And or if we're talking about capital R research that is guided by ethics, that has, you know, formal processes associated with it, I think that's maybe where we can kind of tease out some differences or nuance. But I think if we're also talking about lowercase r research, I think evaluation and assessment really is about helping us understand something that's localized within our context and an experience that might be contextual based. And as we think about capital R research, I think one distinction I want to hold space for possibility around is that I think capital R research generally has aims to be generalizable in terms of a phenomenon that we might be able to see across different sites or localities. But again, I think that there's an opportunity to challenge here a little what counts as research in the work too.
Thank you both. Continuing on this, what factors do you think need to be considered when we are talking about research as a broad field that includes areas like assessment and evaluation? So Cindy, you brought that up as talking about a field. Could you talk more about that?
Well, again, I think it's great to classify the research as in capital or the small c kind of activity. So if you're going for the capital, and Atif is correct, then there's all the things you need to consider, such as that go into ethics, basically. So there's so much more formality to that we need to consider, and processes and procedures that you'll have to follow that'll be localized at your own university, but also in the research community and accepted that way. So it depends what type you're doing, I guess. If you're doing it at a local level and it's for your institution only, then you will have other factors to consider. But it's about following, using the proper method to assess, setting up the question, making sure you know what you're trying to find out, figuring out what's the best method to use to gather that data, and then presenting it, and then please utilize it, and if at all possible, share it. So
yeah, Atifa, did you want to add on to that?
Simply to say that I think that there's an opportunity with all of the factors that we do to think about the ethical experience around research, and to really locate the work that you might want to do, whether it is assessment, evaluation, or research, within the context of what else might be happening within your campus, and to be thinking about where might some of these questions already be asked, or some of that data is already available to you. I think often about our asks to students, and how do we honor in a conceptual way the ethics of their time across all of these different activities.
Thank you. So continuing on a similar topic there, Atifa, what would you say are the first steps for somebody who wants to use their assessment or evaluation work as research?
Yeah, again, and I'll approach this with the lowercase r. I think it is to think about what might be an audience, or who might really benefit from the information that you have to be able to share about what you've learned about your program, your service, or either about the student experience on your campus or their learning. And then to think about where might be some wonderful entry points into being able to share that. So that might be a conference presentation, that might be a blog post, or a kind of lowercase r article on one of the many student affairs sites, and to start to think about some of those ways that you might be able to publish and share that out with folks. If you're thinking capital R research, then I think, as Cindy and I both alluded to, some of those more formal processes might need to be in play, including kind of checking in with your local institutions, either institutional research or ethics, depending on who you might be partnering with, and following those formalized process to move forward around how you might be able to share, if you're able to share, because sometimes your evaluation assessment results might not necessarily meet some of the ethics criteria that folks might have to be able to move forward into capital R research sharing.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, how about you?
Interesting question again for someone wanting to use their assessment or value work as research. I think you need to start and think, could my assessment or evaluation be research? And it goes to then, what is the question? And how can you find the answer? And who will you share it with? And how will it inform your practice? I get really concerned where we just do research for the sake of doing research. We shouldn't be doing that unless it's going to inform something. And I take your point, Atifa, that I think we tend to over assess and maybe over survey for sure students. And, you know, if you're not going to use that information for something, hopefully to improve services, then please don't do it. Just that cautionary statement. But if you are, and it's worthwhile, I think it all starts with the question. So what do you want to know? And then from there, you can figure out how you'll get the data to answer that question and go from there. But first, I think it's, what do you want to know? And well, maybe more so, do I really need to do this? And then what is my question? What do I want to find out? And make sure it's tied to something that you're going to use.
Thank you. I really like all of those points. So can you provide a practical example of a research project you've been involved in that's connected with assessment and evaluation? And we're going to start with you, Cindy.
This is an old one, but it's probably one of my favorite studies that I conducted, and it was on electronic scoring of essays. So we brought in the AccuPlacer test, and in it they have electronic scores on the essay component. And of course, when I'm bringing that in, there was a lot of challenges to, you know, essays can't be scored by machines. And I've got a lot of feedback on that. So I went, yeah, it seems like that doesn't seem logical, but could we do the research on that? And so all, the faculty that were questioning it, I asked them to be a part of a study to see if this was true or not, or how this looked. And it was quite a complex study, but I think it was 10 faculty that all went off. We did some training on their rubric scoring, and they went off and scored these essays. And then the computer had a score also, and I did a comparison to see how this all looked. And what came out of that study was that the computer was more consistent in scoring than the faculty actually were. And that was really interesting. It was interesting, the faculty, what it did reveal to the faculty is that their range of scores on a set essay was quite diverse, from 4 to 10 out of a scale of 12, so that it was a really interesting learning experience for everyone involved, and it informed our practice. We thought, well, no, we can use this, but let's have a faculty member also score it, and if they're a match, we're done. If it isn't, we bring somebody else in. And so so that was, I would say, it had a practical outcome. It was a really interesting study, and it informed the participants in it too. So yeah, I would say that was one of my more interesting studies. Okay, yeah. There's others.
That does sound really interesting.
Yeah.
Atifa.
Cindy, I have so many questions about about that research project and where things led. I'm gonna answer the question, but not answer the question, only because I was thinking about examples that might be really helpful. And a lot of mine that like capital R research has been really tied to either my thesis project, both as an undergrad or grad students, and often focusing on the student experience for the way that policies have been embodied or lived. That we haven't always seen that last leg of like the reciprocity around and the change making. And so in thinking about this, I actually thought I might pull an example from our space that I think might really resonate with folks right now, that my role has largely been around as a consultant. So I really want to name colleagues involved in this work, Professor Ashley Sterling and my colleague Libby West, which is around how do we think about work study programs as a work integrated learning opportunity. And I think speaks to maybe some of the questions of like, how do we use evaluation data and turn it into a research project? And so within our space, every 2 years, we run this fantastic survey around the student experience to get a sense of folks who did aspects of the learning cycle. So the big goal set that they reflect and at the midpoint and at the end around their competencies and around their goals in the work studies experience. How did that impact their career readiness competencies? And so our survey was giving us great data that really affirmed what we knew about work integrated learning in the work study program. And then we actually wanted to take a next step further and to say, how do we actually make this into research and to offer something? Because a lot of the literature around work integrated learning does not consider work study or on-campus employment experience as an active formal work integrated learning opportunity. And so to run the survey again with ethics, with a formal kind of research experience, and in a place where now we have that data where we're able to tell that story about how career readiness is shifted as a function of that learning structure within this space. And so I offer that as one example to say how we can do that over the course of time. That took us about 3 years to kind of be able to move through, but I think has real potential to shift and inform conversation about on-campus employment in a scholarly way around work study experiences. And then always happy to dive in about my own research experiences.
Oh, that's awesome. And I really liked how we had two very different experiences of it. One where it was decided, okay, this was going to be sort of the major R type research at the beginning, and the other one where it was, okay, let's see if what we're doing is working, and then, oh, this is giving us really important information and moving on from it there. We've talked a little bit about how that process happens. Let's talk about, before we move on to the next question, about dissemination of that, because it was brought up earlier that, being able to talk about what you've learned and share it with other people is very important. So Atifa, why don't you start by talking about how you disseminated the findings before you transitioned it into a big research project, and then after you did the ethics approval research project, how those two were different, and then we'll go to Cindy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, one of your primary audiences for any of the research, assessment, or evaluation work that you do are the students or the participants in that study or that experience as well. And so thinking about that last leg of how are you closing the loop, how are you practicing reciprocity in that? And so to be able to have thoughtful communication strategies where you can then reach back out and say, here's what we've heard, and here's how we're making some changes across that. And so I would say that would be the first step that we will always endeavor to do. And so that might mean to email, right, work study students across campus to say, here's how the program is shifting or the learning supports available to you is shifting as a result of that. To then use that data to think about where your sites of change are. And so within that particular example, there's some behavior attitudinal changes that we want to foster for students around their own willingness to engage in that learning structure in a way that's customized to them. And then also for work study supervisors on campus. And so where in all of our communications, we've weaved that in. There's one particular data number, we call it the magic 33%, because that was a key finding. And using that as kind of one of your kind of bite-sized pieces that you're integrating into communications out to cultivate your champions and to bring other folks on board in that work. And so doing that in, events, doing that in emails, doing that in presentations on the roadshow that you might go on to different faculty as well. And then thinking about conference presentations, whether that's the hosting a roundtable. We've done a few kind of formal presentations, offered it as a little bit of an emerging research paper at some conferences, starting to really socialize the idea, understand what else is happening within this space as folks, particularly around work integrated learning. There's so much that's happening. And so how might we, and you know this so well, Noah, from your own research, how might we connect this in with other things that are happening, find others that we can learn from in doing that work. And I think that also then led really beautifully to finding a faculty champion in the work that was willing to move through and kind of get that formal ethics approval and turn this into a research study as well, as we think about who has access to be able to do that within our institutions as well.
Thank you. And Cindy.
Yeah, the sharing part is so critical. And, so it is, internally you can share it with, and I think it's very important to share it with the participants that are in the research. And I certainly did that with faculty. We led to some great discussions actually about it and other types, but I've done research on emotional intelligence of students, and I've always shared my research with all of the students that were involved in those studies. Needing ethics, if you're going to take it outside of there, to present outside of your campus. And that is something why I tend to always include ethics, because I know I want to share it outside the campus. And so I look at local groups, provincial, national, international, presenting at conferences. And then I really endeavor to publish, because I find in a lot of the things, it's not out there. And even just having a few more local studies or specific studies helps the whole resources for that kind of activity. So of course, publishing is a very intensive process and time consuming. So, I don't do it as much as I wish I could, but when I do have a massive project like that one is, I did publish. And so it's so important to disseminate this information, because believe it or not, there's a huge gap. You will be amazed. And even if it has been studied somewhere in the States, it doesn't mean it's going to be the same in Canada. Or even if U of T has studied it, doesn't mean it's going to be the same at TRU. So, and you can always tweak it so it's a little different. So yeah, definitely, if you're doing the research, get the ethics approval so you can share it with your peers inside the institution, but externally too.
Thank you. Okay, so as our last part here for the panelist section, what is a key resource or article or podcast for people? And if you've got a link to it, just drop that in the chat as well. And we'll start with Cindy.
Okay, I thought about this, and what I'd have to say, if you're going to do some research, really start, learn the methods. And for me, I'm talking about quantitative, qualitative, or the mixed methods. And I would really recommend you buy books on those to find out which method you like. Read some books on that. There's lots out there. So I really, really recommend that. But what I find is, in our area anyways, what most of us do or are exposed to survey research. So I'm going to recommend a book on survey research, and it's called Designing and Doing Survey Research. It's by Dr. Lesley. And full disclosure, she was my PhD supervisor, and she actually wrote this book while I was doing my graduate work with her. But it's a dynamite book. It can be for beginners or trained researchers, but it's just a really good book, and I'd highly recommend if you're involved with survey research. I think it's great for even people that are just looking at surveys to understand what they should be looking for. And then if you plan to do research with surveys, it's an excellent guide. So, and I'll drop the, put that in the chat.
I'll build on the advice around methods. I think that's such a foundational aspect of being thoughtful in the selection of methods to that align with helping you get the data or the information that you need that's tied to your research question. I'll drop the link into the chat, but one that's been particularly transformative for me is a book by Shawn Wilson on research as a ceremony, really speaking to or giving voice to Indigenous methods and Indigenous frameworks for research that I think has really challenged me to think about both capital R research, what counts, but also some of the work that we do as professionals in assessment and evaluation, and even in some of the learning outcomes work that we do to really challenge our notions there, and to think about how we might thoughtfully and with integrity integrate Indigenous ways of knowing into our work.
Thank you. And this is our fourth roundtable, and that is the third time a person has recommended that book. So I think that is a glowing referral now for Shawn Wilson's book, because if three complete people from different institutions come on here and all say, "Hey, this is the book. This is what you should read," I think that's a pretty good recommendation there. Thank you both so much. We're going to move into some questions for everybody now, so feel free to unmute yourself. And we're going to start with that same question. What's a practical example of a research project you've been involved with that relates to assessment and evaluation? I'm currently working on one myself, which is in work integrated learning as well. So I'm did interviews with Indigenous students on their perception of work integrated learning. And a large part of that is going to be being used by Mount Royal, where I did the research to improve the work integrated learning program there. And so a lot of it for me is making sure that research is useful in the practical sense and is able to be used to improve things for students. So that's a lot of where I see research being important as well. So those in the participants we have today, feel free to unmute yourself, and what's a research project you've been involved with? While we wait for somebody to get up the courage, Cindy, did you want to mention one of your other research projects? I know you do quite a bit.
Oh boy, one that you know, most of this comes out of comments that students make, and they make me think about it. And I remember a student came out and went, "Wow, that essay was really hard." And I didn't, you know, the topic and that, I thought, wow, I wonder if the topic matters. And I actually wrote, you know, that's my paper title actually. And I looked at all the topics that are given as prompts to the essays, and did a research study comparing those and how so, and that one was a really interesting one too. And I actually did find one topic that everyone did poorly on, no matter what variables I controlled for, you know, so that, and I just took that out of the pool of topics. So that was a really interesting one. Like I say, I've been doing a lot on emotional intelligence, and specifically what I'm interested in is how it changes during students' tenure at their university. And so I've looked at law students, it was from when they entered the program to when they left, so 3 years later. And that was really interesting. Conducted exit interviews and talked to students. I learned a lot about law education, which was great for me. And I've done it with student leaders, right now doing it with undergraduate research mentors, or ambassadors, sorry. Yeah, so, and right now trying to look at more of the program evaluations. So doing some research on the supplemental learning or instruction, as it's called out there, and also trying to dig into a little bit of counseling activities. So,
Thank you. Do any of our participants want to volunteer what they've been working on or have worked on in the past?
I can go.
Wonderful.
So I worked on a first year transition program at Mount St. Vincent University, and we had some kind of comments built into it, and we just looked at this data afterwards, and we're like, there's a lot of data here. We should almost do something with that. And then going through the research the ethics process afterwards, but looking at that and using it, not just the material to evaluate the program, but also to create a larger research of the effectiveness of programs and first year transition programs in smaller Canadian universities, especially online. I would like to say that it's gone further than that, but as Cindy pointed out, the writing and all of that is it's there, and I'm actually, like, on the side of my other screen is all of the data that we're looking at, but that mixed methodology of a lot of quantitative data through Moodle analytics, but also then using qualitative data through surveys and other things that have been in there. So it's a beast of a project, but I'm hoping that you're all inspiring me to actually get working on again. So thank you.
Great to hear. Thank you. Did anybody else? Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Hi. I'm joining from the University of Victoria, and we're currently looking at decolonizing our hiring processes for student leaders. So we're looking at hosting some focus groups and having students come in to talk about their experience in our hiring process. We do a lot of group interviews, and so we're trying to do that. I don't think it's going to evolve into a full research project, but that's something that we're trying to focus on right now and sort of throughout the summer. We're also hoping to do focus groups with our international students to look at our programming and to sort of see what has worked within COVID and what hasn't worked in the online world, and then trying to sort of transfer that into hybrid model for the fall semester. So those are sort of our two big projects that are going to be happening over the summer. So I've been really appreciating all of these conversations to sort of get some resources and get some other ideas of what people are doing to make sure that we have those conversations in a meaningful way. So thank you.
Wonderful. That's great to hear.
Can I I'll add a comment to that, Teresa. Our Wellness Center coordinator, Chelsea Corsi, is looking at ways to decolonize the Wellness Center. And one thought about it is bringing in elders, if at all possible. Of course, it all depends on COVID right now and that, but yeah, so, and our Writing Center coordinator, Jenna Goodard, they're looking at anti-racist practice in sort of writing or educational support centers too. So it's some really interesting stuff happening right now.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, everybody. The next question is, what are the challenges that you see to getting involved in research? And since it took so long for the participants to respond to the first one, I suspect that we might have some great responses to this one.
I can go. I feel like for us, it's honestly just time. There was one of the other roundtable discussions that was focused on assessment off the side of your desk, and I feel like it's definitely, I think in that conversation someone mentioned of just making sure that the assessment is incorporated at the beginning of developing your program, and sort of that you continuously think about that rather than just hosting something and then be like, okay, now we need to assess how did we do. So I feel like just sometimes taking a step back from my role and being like, okay, we're not going to be doing logistics right away. We're not going to be implementing this, and taking a step back to think about the bigger picture. What are the objectives? What are we wanting to do with this program, or with the hiring process, etc. So I feel like for me, it's just taking that time to like get out of my day-to-day meetings, like organizing like emails, and just take the time to discuss that and to like make sure that we have an intentional process to do our evaluation or to move into research. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's really just time. I'm very interested in it. That's why I'm trying to attend all of these sessions, but I just find that it's very time consuming and just falls to the side often, which is too bad.
I know exactly what you mean. The time commitment for it, especially if you want to go through the ethics approval process as well, if you're intending to do publication or widely sharing it. Yeah, it's tough. And so much in student affairs is based around the idea of, okay, you're here, now do the publicly visible work. And this type of research is not publicly visible until the end most of the time. And so it really does sort of say, okay, yes, but this is an educational institution and we are wanting to pursue increasing our knowledge about this, not just doing the things, but knowing why we do the things and how well we do the things. And that's a shift in people's thinking about student affairs that I don't know if we're going to be seeing anytime soon. So I see where you're coming from with that. It's very difficult to do. Did anybody else want to? Oh.
I just want to pull on that one. I think that's a great point about this work being largely invisible, which then is seen as maybe not necessarily work, even though we all know it's a sizable chunk and it should be an important part. And it's that kind of that division between the educational and research aspect of a university as opposed to that support services. And I think maybe trying to bridge that divide is difficult at times. But also the nature of, I can't even remember where I was going, but what to do with data and can you actually use this in an effective way? I think that's the things there, and really just pushing to be more, how do we integrate research into the nature of our work itself? And is it, from the ethical standpoint, how does that then play out? Like, are we crossing boundaries themselves by researching what we're doing, and how do we kind of balance all of that within it as well? I think it's been one of the other challenges besides time, which is for everyone. It's, there's never enough of it.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you so much. Atifa or Cindy, did you want to say anything about this before we move on to the next?
It definitely is time, and I do think it works way better if you're intentional about it. So definitely think about how you can include it, and then yeah, it's so challenging, the time commitment, and then there's just that putting yourself out there. Publishing is not easy. Like, it's I often, when I get the email back with the decision in it, I'll wait I can't even open it right away because I don't know if I'm ready for the acceptance or rejection or whatever. But I think the secret is that intentional, design it in, build it in to whatever activity you can, and then you at least have the option. And I think in most cases, all of us are connected to some kind of professional association. So at the very least, you can present it to your peers. If you go a step further and publish, fantastic. But the sharing in conferences or in something like this, I mean, that I think we can all do. And a long time ago, some 20 plus years, I just basically took the attitude that if I'm going to a conference, I'm going to present. And I have done that ever since. Every conference I go to, I present, except if I organize it. So I didn't. There was one where I was the organizer and I just didn't have time. So challenge yourself like that. You know, put yourself out there. The one thing about presenting is you're around your peers and they're really supportive. And that's really great. And then if you can get the time, try and publish it. But intention is the secret, I think.
That's a great point. And it reminds me of something that Ian Cole told me when I first started in student affairs, that everybody should go to a conference once, and then every other time they go to that same conference, they should have submitted a proposal. Even if they didn't get accepted to present, that's fine, but always have something that you can talk about. Atifa.
Yeah, no, I love that notion, right, of like, how do we contribute into the communities that we're part of? I think the time is a tricky one, because I think it's often, sometimes when you're doing this work, it can feel a little lonely too, in terms of like doing the assessment and sitting with the data and kind of you know, going through and combing through and finding that nugget, or figuring out what's a different way to run the data to get it, maybe to see if there's something that you're not missing too. And so I think often about who will be the people around you that will support you, that will cheerlead you, that will be your accountability check-ins as needed along the way. And I think sometimes because its timing is tight, it can feel a little lonely at times. And Noah, to your point of like the work's invisible, and sometimes the outcome of it is a year or so down the line, finding motivation, I think, can sometimes be hard to keep going at it. What has been helpful is within I work to figure out what is that one big question that I will try to answer within a year. And so to also not try to have too many like research or projects kind of going within the year. What's the one question about the work that I really want to spend the time kind of chewing on, or it's a bit of a knotty problem, not naughty nice, but not in terms of like a knot that you might want to try to untangle over the course of the year, I think is often really helpful too. And then to think about who I might need to pull in has been really motivating for me, and helps keep me accountable to the process and the work, and to create the protected time, or advocate for the protected time to do that work along the course of the year.
Thank you. Let's move in now to see if there's anything that we didn't touch on that you were really hoping we would.
I was going to ask, with focus groups, what do you find has been like a good group size to have meaningful conversations?
Cindy, did you want to start with that one?
I don't use focus groups that so much, so I'll leave that with Atifa.
Atifa?
Yeah, absolutely. We found around 4 to 5 tend to work really nicely, and having like a max of 2 questions that you're going to try to get through with the group, and really allowing for the space. My other quick tip is hire students who will work with you to co-design what a good focus group will look like, and you'll train to facilitate, because they are so much richer conversations. You can attend to power dynamics really differently in focus group spaces as well. They're one of my go-to or group interview methods. So those would be my quick tips. Yeah.
Something you might also want to look into is working with some of your Indigenous colleagues to bring in some of the talking circle methodologies that are being used for focus groups these days as well. I found them to be very effective if they're used properly, because they really help people to bring up or to build on each other's ideas, and it also really brings out the people who might rely on other people to talk for them. It really gives them an opportunity to express themselves well. Okay, any other questions that we hadn't touched on yet? Okay. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining me. Thank you, Atifa and Cindy. It's been wonderful getting to talk to you both again. And thank you to Teresa and Marisha for joining us. Thank you for having some questions and for having a good discussion with us. And I really appreciate everybody who joined us today. I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon. Is there any last bits you wanted to say, Cindy or Atifa, before I stop this?
Thank you, Noah, for organizing.
Yes,
the
thank you
series
very
of
much.
events.
Well, have a great day. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.